The third gate. Difficulty at the beginning. Difficulty at the beginning is a great name, and it so much expresses the nature of what the third gate is all about. The third gate sits in the sacral center, and it is the gate of ordering. But as the gate of ordering, it is also about the nature of confusion. The fundamental challenge of initiation is to transcend confusion and establish order. Now, that is the thematic for the gate, but it is a thematic that is restricted to a specific meaning. That specific meaning is the fundamental challenge. It's a challenge. It doesn't mean that the challenge is taken and victory is achieved. In other words, one of the things to understand about the third gate and the third gate process is that though it can work very, very hard to, transform confusion into clarity, transform confusion into order, the fact is that doesn't necessarily mean it will succeed. It doesn't. And it's something really to keep in mind about the nature of the third gate. After all, this is a mutative process, and not all mutations are intended to take or succeed. Each and every one of us, because of the uniqueness of our nature, each and every one of us has the potential to carry within us the possibility of a new mutation. But after all, mutation, in order for it to survive and to be fruitful, needs to be transferred to others, that the mutation has to be seen as positive for the species as a whole. In other words, in order for it to take hold in the world. The fact that there are so many potential mutations taking place all the time, we know quite clearly that real changes in the way in which the totality operates, that these kinds of mutations are rare and they are not something that one can count on in that sense. So what we're looking at in the third gate is that the third gate not only has to deal with trying to live with confusion, but at the same time accepting the fact that it may never get beyond that confusion, that the mutation in and of itself may not have what is necessary to be carried forward. Remember, we're dealing in the third gate, in its relationship to its harmonic gate, the 60th gate, we're dealing with a channel of mutation, and this is the format energy of the individual process. This is the pulse energy of mutation itself. And the third gate takes the greatest blast, if you will, of mutative juices in its relationship with the root center. So here we have the third gate, the sacral gate, this gate of ordering. If you have the third gate in a defined sacral center, then one of the things for you to be very much aware of is the fact that you are going to have those opportunities in your life to deal with the new and try to find a way to make sense, if you will, or bring to a level of understanding. I'm using collective language here. Try to bring this mutation out and beyond your individual process. And so all of those who carry the third gate carry a mission. It's a mission. And it is this mission to bring about change. Each and every one of us in our dynamic, carrying individuality, carrying a third gate, that all the beings on the planet who are carrying a third gate are an instrument of continual change, but also confusion, and also the 50th gate, the cauldron, in the splenic center, pointed at the sacral center to its harmonic gate, the 27th gate, nourishment, and they form the channel of preservation, design of custodianship. The 50th gate is the gate of values, but the 50th gate is an extraordinary gate. That is, in many ways, it is the heart, if you will, or the core of the whole splenic system. And it's the heart of the core of the splenic system when it comes to something that is absolutely essential. It provides the source material for the development of the intelligence in humans to be able to enhance their potential to survive. And it is this deep, deep responsibility of the 50th gate. After all, the 50th gate, the fear that's associated with the 50th gate is the fear of responsibility. That it is the 50th gate that is responsible for the development of human intelligence. Out of the 50th gate come the three streams that we associate with human intelligence. That is the stream of judgmentation, the logical stream operating through the spleen, the theme of intuition, the individual process operating through the spleen, and instinct, that is the tribal process. All three of these, judgmentation, intuition, and instinct, these are things that are rooted in the 50th gate. It is the 50th gate that is the lawgiver. It's the value of historical continuity whose traditional values serve and enrich the present and the future, and that you can really see the depth of the importance of the 50th gate in its first line, the line of the immigrant. It says humbleness of origin that benefits rather than restricts destiny. And this is one of the great driving forces in humanity. That is, we are here to refine our process. Everything about the first line of the 50th gate is the theme of refinement. And everything about the nature of the way in which humanity has managed to survive, and the way in which humanity has managed to evolve to its present place of power in terms of, hierarchy on this planet, all of this has been rooted in the 50th gate. Its responsibility to ensure this deep, deep potential within humanity to develop the strategies for survival. The splenic center, the body's immune system, is also, the very core of our deepest fears. And our deepest fears are all related to survival. And everything about our capacity to be able to survive, because we are limited in our physical capacities. We are limited in the power of our jaw to bite, and the strength of our arm, and the power of our legs, and so forth and so on. That we are very limited in relationship to many of the forces that we had to deal with in our evolutionary struggle to survive. The thing that made a difference was the development of our intelligence, the sophistication of the strategies that we were ultimately able to develop. And it is out of the development of these strategies that ultimately we were able to triumph. More than that, the 50th gate establishes the rules, the law in its right angle configuration. This is one of the primary gates of law on the cross of the laws. This is the law that is established, and the law that is established not only as the obvious in that sense as a control mechanism, but much more than that, as a way of ensuring that the collected intelligence is something that is passed on, is honored, and so the species as a whole continues to refine and develop. The 50th gate is a complex gate. If you have the 50th gate active in a defined splenic center, then taking responsibility in this life is absolutely essential for you. And taking responsibility for your life is essential to you. However, the only way in which you're going to be able to do so is if you're operating correctly as yourself. If you have the 50th gate in an undefined splenic center, there is enormous pressure on you to be conditioned into taking responsibility for things that are not for you and are unhealthy for you and difficult for you to let go of.
Who's volatile energy out there. But there's something else that you see. Every single one of these individual gates that we've touched upon. Format energies, again, we're dealing with individual format energy. And there is nothing that has to deal with more pressure than the third gate. The third gate deals with an enormous pressure. Obviously that pressure coming out of the 60th gate, coming out of the root center. But you see, the 60th gate represents the old in the sense that, however you want to describe that, old, hidden, not yet available, however you want to look at it. And the third gate is about suddenly having to deal with an impulse of frequency that is not recognizable, and what to do with it. I mean, just what to do with it. This is what is basically the beginning of a mutation. And everything about the third gate is that the third gate is the only gate that is designed to handle the mutative process. In other words, it's up to the third gate to be able to bring order to the confusion, difficulty at the beginning. It is the third gate that distinguishes us between being male and female. The third gate is a sacral gate that carries enormous influence in our lives, particularly in our prenatal life. Because within the prenatal context, it also involves whether or not we are going to be endowed with recessive genes and other kinds of configurations. I mean, the third gate is really a mutative monster in that sense. When you deal with it on the mundane plane as an activation, particularly as Sun, Earth, or planetary activation, the third gate can often be quite difficult. And quite difficult because it is part of what is the dilemma of individuality or mutation, which is that it does not know until it knows. In other words, while you are confused as a third gate being, you do not know that progress is being made. In other words, let's say the confusion starts on day 1. On day 9, you still feel the same confusion, but 30 seconds later, suddenly it's gone. And you have no idea that underneath that process, that third gate is trying to bring to order, it's like giving a computer an enormous calculation, and waiting for it to render all the data. There's still confusion until the data is finally rendered, and eventually you get there. And it's very much the way in which this works. So the third gate stays confused until the moment of clarity, which means that it can be confused most of its life. It can be confused, get the mutation, and end up being confused by the next thing. It will spend most of its process in the confused state. However, when generator talk, sacral talk, when the sacral is operating correctly, the elements of the sacral, these are life forces that go out, and envelop the planet. And everything about the nature of any of the aspects in the sacral is that the quality of the energy that they put out is determined by whether they're responding or not. If you've got a third gate and you're experimenting with your design, the response that you have, that response carries with it what you have no access to. The level of development that exists underneath the confusion. But there is no way that you can move it faster or slower, but the more you're responding, the sooner it's going to work on your behalf. Now, if you're a 360 as an example, this is an ongoing process. In other words, the only way that you're ever going to be able to really fulfill the mutative process is that you have to keep on getting the sacral to work. Every time the sacral works, every time the sacral responds, it reinforces the whole program, and it reinforces the potential for mutation. So when you're looking out of the world with these eyes, what do you see? You see confusion. And not only do you see confusion, but you don't necessarily see an end to the confusion. You don't. Just like the way the third gate operates. You don't. You just see that there is a lot of confused, volatile energy out there. But there's something else that you see. Every single one of these individual gates that we've touched upon, individuality carries a chemistry, the chemistry of melancholy. And it's something to understand that because the nodal configurations are going to include all of the individual gates that are in the body graph, and there's a hell of a lot of them, is to understand that most of our vision, that is probably about half of the vision of humanity, is tempered by sadness. And it's interesting to note that the binary in that, the chemistry of melancholy is also the potential of the muse. Right? So, you're either sad or creative. It really is what the business is all about. And it means that about half of all of humanity sees the world as either in happy or sad terms, or creative or not creative terms. It's one of the conditioning elements of the way in which, they look out in the world. And the third gate, particularly because it's the format energy of the whole individual process. And as that format energy, that confusion, when you're looking out with those eyes, not only do you see confusion, but you see an enormous amount of sadness. And you see that life itself is the creative spark is missing. After all, you're not looking out on an aware world. And it's hard to see with those eyes that somehow out of all of that, some mutation can take hold and transform it. But it's also the possibility, because it's always duality, it's also the possibility to look out in those eyes and to be able to see the other and say, it's okay, wait, it'll come, You can see the potential that is there. You can see the potential to leave the confusion behind. You can see the potential to transform the sadness into art, into creativity, into valued movement, if you will. Sacral beings, if you're not responding, you're not using your sacral the way it was intended to be used, and it's not going to function correctly. It's just not. It's a motor after all, and it's a motor that's supposed to be working in a certain way. The 3 and the 50, in their right angle configuration, this is an arm of the cross of the laws. And it's interesting because when you're looking out through the world and you see the world in confusion, if you understand the underlying laws of things, it's all okay. You can see that there is a way to work through the confusion, but there is never any way to be able to know what it is in the moment. This is the whole thing about the mutative process. And it's the same thing with the seeing. If you're looking out of an individual eye, because the patina can be so sad, that there are these moments where you spike and you see the other side. You see, and out of that, the archetype of that is the comedian. The tradition of comedians is that they are actually very, very sad people who make everybody else laugh. And it's generally a very realistic archetype, because most of them are. They're rather melancholy, And then out of the melancholy comes all of the humor. All of the humor, because they're seeing in a certain way through that sadness. And on the other side of it, the polarity of it is that it becomes, to the other anyway, it becomes very funny. The 50th gate on the other side is the gate of the cauldron. And this is the source of all human intelligence. So the 50th gate is something that's quite special. Out of the 50th gate comes the qualities of judgmentation and intuition and instinct that are in the streams that operate through the spleen. All of that originates out of the 50th gate, in the same way that all of the emotional streams originate out of the 6th gate on the other side. The 50th gate is very special because it is the source of intelligence, and understand what that means. It is the source of our strategic thinking. Everything about intelligence is that intelligence is a byproduct of survival strategies, right? In other words, the more sophisticated the form, the more sophisticated their strategies for survival. Human beings are enormously diverse now in their strategies for survival, which has made us the most successful, in those terms, species on the planet. The 50th gate, when you're looking out through that, what you're really looking at is whether or not the world you see is equipped to survive. And is equipped to survive not only on the fundamental level, do they have enough to eat? It is the cauldron, it's a big cooking pot. But do they have the strategies they need? Are they intelligent enough? In the tribe, the 50th gate insists on it. It's the 50th gate that says, you are only going to be recognized as an adult in this tribe if you go through this, and this. They structure it, they educate it relative to the society, relative to the culture. So the 350 is a very odd thing. Now think about them as laws for a moment. The third gate is the law of mutation. And the law of mutation is that the moment mutation takes place, a new law has to be established. That's the law of mutation. So, the third card trumps all others. Trumps all other laws. Galileo can do Galileo, but Einstein did better. You can do what you do. The mutation, When you look at the 50th gate is the law that says you have broken the tribal rules and we no longer want to have anything to do with you. And you can see these rules because we have carved them into stone. The 50th gate carves laws into stone. Sometimes they insist that God actually did it, but I don't think that is likely. But anyway, they carved them into stone and say, here is the law. Thou shalt not. I love that. My favorite was, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ass. Why not? Never mind. Thou shalt not. The 50th gate is full of thou shalt not. So when you look out through 50 eyes, you see the world that way, and you see who's breaking the law. You do. And all kinds of laws, moral laws, civil laws, imagined laws. You see it all the time. So the 3 and the 50 is a very interesting thing. You look out of the 3 and you don't really know what's going on. You just know something's happening. You look out of the 50 and you see that human beings aren't very well equipped. They're not well equipped. And that human beings are afraid to take responsibility. And this is what the 50 sees. It sees they're not willing to take the responsibility, whatever it is. They see that. And when they see that they're not willing to take the responsibility, those are the people that say there should be a law. It's hilarious to watch all of you driving around with your lights on in the daytime. I've come to the country of the blind, where the one headlight is king. I mean, what to do? Wien is now a city of light all the time, right? So you have the 350.
And also depression. Whenever we're dealing with individuals, the third gate, difficulty at the beginning. Difficulty at the beginning is a great name, and it so much expresses the nature of what the third gate is all about. The third gate sits in the sacral center, and it is the gate of ordering. But as the gate of ordering, it is also about the nature of confusion. The fundamental challenge of initiation is to transcend confusion and establish order. Now, that is the thematic for the gate, but it is a thematic that is restricted to a specific a specific meaning. That specific meaning is the fundamental challenge. It's a challenge. It doesn't mean that the challenge is taken and victory is achieved. In other words, one of the things to understand about the third gate and the third gate process is that though it can work very, very hard to, transform confusion into clarity, transform confusion into order, the fact is that doesn't necessarily mean it will succeed. It doesn't. And it's something really to keep in mind about the nature of the third gate. After all, this is a mutative process, and not all mutations are intended to take or succeed. Each and every one of us, because of the uniqueness of our nature, each and every one of us has the potential to carry within us the possibility of a new mutation. But after all, mutation, in order for it to survive and to be fruitful, needs to be transferred to others, that the mutation has to be seen as positive for the species as a whole. In other words, in order for it to take hold in the world. The fact that there are so many potential mutations taking place all the time, we know quite clearly that real changes in the way in which the totality operates, that these kinds of mutations are rare and they are not something that one can count on in that sense. So what we're looking at in the third gate is that the third gate not only has to deal with trying to live with confusion, but at the same time accepting the fact that it may never get beyond that confusion, that the mutation in and of itself may not have what is necessary to be carried forward. Remember, we're dealing in the third gate, in its relationship to its harmonic gate, the 60th gate, we're dealing with a channel of mutation, and this is the format energy of the individual process. This is the pulse energy of mutation itself. And the third gate takes the greatest blast, if you will, of mutative juices in its relationship with the root center. So here we have the third gate, the sacral gate, this gate of ordering. If you have the third gate in a defined sacral center, then one of the things for you to be very much aware of is the fact that you are going to have those opportunities in your life to deal with the new and try to find a way to make sense, if you will, or bring to a level of understanding. I'm using collective language here. Try to bring this mutation out and beyond your individual process. And so all of those who carry the third gate carry a mission. It's a mission. And it is this mission to bring about change. Each and every one of us in our dynamic, carrying individuality, carrying a third gate, that all the beings on the planet who are carrying a third gate are an instrument of continual change, but also confusion and also depression. Whenever we're dealing with individuality, we're dealing with the potential of melancholy because it's inherent in the chemistry of the individual. And when we're dealing with a format energy, we're dealing with the potential of depression. So in looking at the third gate, what can happen so often to those that carry the third gate that is defined in the sacral, is that they get caught in constantly trying to fight their way through the confusion to find order. And that in not being able to easily do that, in not being able to see a way to do that they can end up being deeply, deeply depressed and feeling like there's absolutely no place for them in the world. After all, to be an individual and to have a mutative experience is only to heighten your sense of difference. And how difficult that is to order that, to bring that into the continuity, the normal mundane continuity of one's life, so it then can be transferable. The third gate is very profound and has an enormous impact on our lives. The 50th gate, the cauldron.
מסיימים 42, סיום, נכנסים 3:50. רק שוב, השעה המדויקת. עכשיו לקרוס. זה גייט. קרוס. אנחנו נעבור מ-cross of limitation. זיבי ימנית. מעניין, אני יוצא גם... זהו, אז לא, זה לא יוצא שזה בימין. אז נעבור מפה לפה. זה כבר אנחנו קוראים אבל לא מתרגמים. כל אחד מה שמתאים לו. זה בטרנזיט והמילים בדיוק לאותו רגע. זה סרטון שכבר מחכה לנו פה. 11:56 וזה יהיה 26:44. לשדר בשתיקה בעיקר. ולהיכנע, קנייה, שזה גם ב3 וגם ב26:44. קנייה לסדר המוטציוני.